Today's episode of the Lucky Orange Show is all about grading your website to find better optimization ideas. And my guest for this conversation is Cameron Calder, the founder of Hype Digital. Cameron and the team at Hype Digital come from a performance marketing background, so they approach their work with clients from an analytics-first, data-first approach, and they really help people find more meaning in their website data. In our conversation today, Cameron and I talked all about grading and prioritizing optimization ideas to help you decide whether you should go after those low-hanging fruit first, or maybe a more complex idea that might have a bigger net impact. We also handled a question that comes up all the time, which is, if I'm super confident in an idea, why do I even need to test it? Is it worth creating that experimentation paper trail, or can I just publish and move even faster? So if you're ready, let's go talk to Cameron. Cameron, we finally did it. You and I have been kind of chasing each other down, trying to make this podcast happen for a little while now. So I'm happy to finally get to connect with you.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Appreciate you having me, and appreciate your patience on getting us together. Yeah,
it's been a two-way street. So Hype Digital, let's give our friendly listener some context of kind of who you are, where you come from, and services offered by Hype Digital.
Sure. So we actually initially were birthed out of a performance marketing agency. So we predominantly focused on running paid advertising. And we saw a massive gap in the way that we were running advertising campaigns to a very shitty website experience. And that was harming our cost per acquisition, it was harming our performance on ads, and we were building all the most amazing traffic to warm up and nurture people through to that website. And it was failing at that point. So we knew there was an opportunity there. We started out A/B testing landing pages, building out landing pages, integrating them to our ads. And that kind of was the inception of a CRO program. And that led us to finding out that actually there's a great opportunity outside of paid advertising, where you have direct marketing, your organic, your email marketing, all of these different channels that make up the other 60% of your traffic. And that's all going to this website experience that was pretty bad back then, and for a lot of websites is still very bad. So we found that opportunity that we can create not just this landing page optimization experience, but we can actually own that environment through experimentation, and running that at a high velocity when the client doesn't have that heavy weight, and we can take on all that workload and they see the benefit of all those results. So that led us to conversion rate optimization where it is today, and the predominant part of our offering as an agency. And then we've now bolstered on an analytics product from our side, which makes up about 10-15% of our business, that integrates all the data into conversion rate optimization, where you can use data-led insights to build better experiments and then report on those accurately, which we'll be surprised how almost every GA4 account is not set up correctly or isn't tracking data. So that's led us.
We're all still trying to dig through that. There's some parts about it that are powerful and necessary and a good change, but people are still finding their way. You talk about shitty websites. It may be off color, but it makes me think of, like, you can't outwork a bad diet. You also can't optimize ads and outwork a bad website experience. And so it's such a cohesive thing. And I do think a lot of agencies might miss that, where it's like, we'll optimize your ads and then hands off. And there's only so much you can do from that end of things, and just hope and cross your fingers that the website holds up. It's part of the bargain.
I mean, a big part of it, what we also saw, is that there'd be like a bad performing website, and the first thing that they do is go like, cool, we're going to redesign the entire thing. It's just like, go, now you're just creating a second bad website. That doesn't mean it's going to perform well. And that's where we're like, okay, guys, there's a performance element that's not clicking here. And we still see that with a lot of optimization clients that we work with or have worked with in the past, that everything leads to this big redesign because they think that's the kind of golden nugget that's going to fix everything, where it's incremental changes over time.
Sure. Most of the Lucky Orange customer base is not starting from zero optimizing a website. They're coming to us and saying, we're trying some optimization. We want to do it better. We want to be smarter. When you guys start working with a new client, where do we even begin to look for optimization opportunities? What are some of those things that are fundamental usability issues that pop up, or are there areas where we can just start by saying this, when we evaluate a website, this is good or bad, or get going there?
Yeah. So there's definitely, based on our experience, we have specific areas on the website which are focal points. And normally what we try to do is find the closest area to a conversion. So in the case of an e-commerce, it would be your product details or add to cart environment. Those are the highest impact areas where you want to focus on. But to take a step back, where we actually start with our clients is that we need to understand where those friction points are in their environment. So we'll typically start with a quantitative analytics platform like GA4, for example, where we can look at funnel analysis and we can find where drop-off points, and we do some crazy cool stuff on segmentation and understanding where those exactly are. Once we find those, then we use like a Lucky Orange type tool where we can actually understand why is that taking place. And that's the kind of like, where is the problem? Now we need to understand why it has occurred, and what is that actual problem that's occurred. Once you have that, then you can hypothesize like actually how you're going to solve it. But you need to actually understand like, what is the problem? You can't just optimize for the sake of optimizing. You need to be creating some sort of, there must be a problem that you must solve first. And then you need the data to back it up through a tool like you guys.
I think that why is the $1 million and maybe even $1 billion question for people is, how do I train this muscle, or how do I create a system that supports my ability to find why something is happening? And the system and process you described to say quantitative plus qualitative gets us a lot closer. I think that's the perfect use case and perfect way of looking at a tool like Lucky Orange, tool like GA4, that combination of data there. Is it just a matter of getting reps in and practicing to be able to understand why something is happening? Or are there any other piece of advice or anything that you recommend to say, or your team uses when you're trying to answer, okay, here's why we think this is happening?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is the investigation piece, and that's actually why research is so important, and it drives everything in optimization. So without research, you have a very shaky foundation that's built of nothing, and eventually it's all going to come crashing down, because you're going to end up making a massive change in your website that you thought was backed by something, and it's going to ruin everything. And that's why when we look at research, we look at it as this funnel where it starts very broad, and then you guide yourself down until you're so narrow that, you know, exactly what you're looking for, you're getting all the answers. And that's exactly where you look at the quantitative side to know where the problem is, qualitative side, as well as, you know, the behavioral tracking work that's there guides you exactly to know why, to some degree, something's broken. But then just asking the customers as well. I think everyone shies away from actually asking the people that are struggling why they're struggling, when that, you know, they're the ones with the answers. And that's why, you know, that kind of feedback loop becomes very tight once you go down that kind of research funnel.
And there's no doubt that surveying customers is time intensive and sometimes difficult to get people to respond. Is that what you mean when you say that part of the research and contacting customers? Does it just boil down to surveying?
Yeah, so there's definitely surveying as part of it. We also do actual usability studies where we'll have a video call with the actual customers, and those would be drilled down customers from your, say for example, it's a repeat customer flow that you're trying to solve a specific problem where they have an account on, say, an e-commerce store, and we want them to buy assisted products to what they've bought in the past. Then that's a specific segment. So, you know, you're going to have to survey them through, say, website surveys, or even, you know, manual questionnaires via email, just to gather a whole bunch of data. But then once you have that data, then you can have this usability study, which is basically having an interview online, walking them through the site on the exact questions that you know you want to ask without guiding them too aggressively. And it's exactly that, is that the surveys do take up a lot of time. but it's invaluable stuff because a lot of it
Yeah.
you're just guessing because you get to that what and where question, but you haven't actually answered the why in detail. And that's why it's important to actually go down to that customer level and just ask them, because you can watch what they do, but you can't find out why they're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the juice is almost always worth the squeeze when it comes to surveying people. And, there's a funny thing that happens, I think, in surveying customers is that you can't overvalue one person's response, right? Like we have to account for however many people we feel comfortable with saying. If we survey 100 people, we feel comfortable in this general direction. We can analyze that data. But there's something funny that happens where you'll get one person will say something, they'll say a phrase, or they'll say something about how they view your product. And it just, in my experience, it unlocks something where you're like, oh, I've never even thought about it that way. I didn't even know they were comparing us against this other tool. I didn't know that they didn't understand that. And then you can look at the other survey responses and maybe see them say a similar thing in a different way. And there is a lot of power in that individual response, even though we don't necessarily want to make a directional decision with one person's feedback. But it is super duper powerful. I'm curious that because that does take time, there's a rub that happens in organizations, and I imagine with your clients that say, we want to move fast. We want to have, they won't necessarily use the phrase experimentation velocity, but they'll say we want to move quickly. We want to get results as fast as possible. Cameron, why haven't you 10x'd us in the first 2 weeks? What does that conversation look like to say, this is a part of the process? How do you speed things up? I mean, you and I were talking about AI before we hit record here. Is that a part of it? Are you hoping that's a part of it? How do we kind of solve for this, meet in the middle of the urge of moving faster, but also making sure that we're moving in the right direction?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a great question specifically for us, because we run on the fact, especially coming from a performance background where you're optimizing ads pretty much by the hour, we know that speed is everything. And specifically, we play in the kind of, medium-sized business market where you're not big enough, where you have lengthy processes, and typically sign-off takes a long time, so it's okay to be patient. But then you're not a startup where everything needs to be kind of scrappy and all of that. So you kind of play in this high intensity, high speed, but also very professional space, which adds a lot of pressure. And what we've kind of tried to build out in our process is shorten that time to value as much as possible for everything that we deliver into the client. So where there are delays, we can create other areas where we can add value. For example, Lucky Orange, for example, that is something that needs to gain data over time, just like GA4. But there are specific fixes on the website, for example, responsiveness. And it seems like such a primitive kind of optimization that someone would look at to just go
sure,
is it perfect for mobile? Does it actually function correctly? And every single client we've done an audit on, we will find one specific responsive mistake that is just not detrimental to the business, but it's going to add a bump on some revenue level. So we have these kind of conversion bumps or fixes that we find upfront immediately as we jump into the account. And there's that shortened time to value where yes, we're not going to see 2x revenue lifts, but we are going to see some impact from not day one, but week one, where we can start fixing things immediately. Then we can start running tests in parallel that aren't backed by data, but are backed by experience, and we know have a high probability of winning based on the vertical or based on the industry that you're in. And then by the time we start running those experiments, we start having some actual impact. We've already fixed a lot of the website errors that were broken. Maybe it's links, maybe it's responsiveness, whatever it is. And we've run a few tests that we're now implementing. Hopefully we have a few wins as well. And by the end of month 2, month 3, we've already started having some wins. And now we have this behavioral data and GA4 that's now tracking correctly. And then we can deep dive in that. So to answer your question with a long answer, it's it's very much about like building this evolution of cycle of value for the client, where we can make sure that, because from our side, if we were the client, I wouldn't be happy paying X amount per month and I haven't seen any results after a month or 2 months or 3 months. And I can't justify.
Win's a win. Yeah,
Win's a win.
A win's a win. And I think you're right. Like you have to start with usability anyway. I mean, speed and broken links and all these things are missing links, whatever it might be, those obviously matter. And I think that people can discount them, but saying this is where we're going to start with saying, if people can't use your website properly, if it's loading slowly, if images are broken, let's start there. And those are things that might be easier to identify and easier to fix while you build up the data, while you start the surveying, while you lead to the more complex tests. I was thinking about, Lucas Vermeer has a blog post that I go back to all the time. And there's two parts. One says speed is not velocity, which is to say moving fast is nothing without moving in the right direction, in the right direction. But also there is no velocity without speed. So like we have to keep moving quickly and testing and experimenting to even achieve any sort of velocity. One thing that I even struggle with on my own and from a CRO perspective is that I think there are some things, usability fixes and bug fixes aside, that feel like it's okay and safe to just implement as opposed to experimenting with. We feel super confident that this change is going to be either low risk enough that it's just not worth spending the time on a test, or we're just really confident that our customers are going to like this. We just want to make the change. How do you guys handle experimentation, ideas, whatever it might be on the Hype Digital side, that you say, this might not need a test. We might be able to hit publish on this?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It's a complex question, but what we'll do is all of the fixes we'll implement directly. Those are standard black and white stuff that need to be changed. I mean, if you don't have a responsive site, then the chances of it performing better to not be responsive is extremely low. And then in terms of the implementation, it goes to like how impactful, or in lack of a better word, is risky this is actually going to be once you implement it. So if it's a small change, for example, like a copy change or messaging change or anything like that, you can do like a direct implementation. But it's better to just test it. I mean, like even something small like that can be a quick test that can be run, proven, implemented like pretty fast. And I think a lot of people look at experimentation, and what we're trying to do is just like meet clients in the middle, where experimentation sounds like this never-ending laboratory that just like nothing ever comes out of it. It's just like everyone's in this constant cycle, and where's the client getting this like revenue from? There's just there's only learnings, but there's no impact. And I think a lot of the languages that we use is changing towards like we're actually running conversion tactics. Like these are things that are tactics to be implemented by the clients. We're not running these for the sake of the learnings. And I think we need to change that, where the mindset is like, it's not that we're stopping the implementation, we're just proving that it's going to be amazing, or how amazing is it going to be as an outcome. So yeah, to answer your question, it would definitely be something that would run the experiments, for lack of a better word, is that it must be run to prove how impactful, how detrimental it is, because that paper trail is extremely important. You might implement something and then have a massive decline on the website, but actually your PPC spend dropped for some reason. Or you might implement that thing and then there was a big promotional thing or a macro factor that affected a spike in the website, and then suddenly everyone's looking at that as the biggest change. But actually it would have been 2x more should you have implemented something that was positive or didn't implement it at all. So definitely experiment at all costs.
Right. Let's say we're in the phase where we've got a great survey cycle running. We've paired qualitative, quantitative. We have a long list of ideas. How do you recommend prioritizing these for testing? I think there's some clear things that go into here, like the amount of effort to build. But what else goes into that rubric of almost grading experimentation ideas and prioritizing experimentation ideas?
Yeah, so in the conversion rate optimization industry, everyone has loads of prioritization frameworks and how they prioritize it. As we've like molded from landing page optimization to where we are now, we still want to keep that impact piece. That is exactly why we moved into CRO. We didn't move in for research learnings. Like, it's cool to have insights, but I mean, what if they're not going to add value to the business? Then what's the point of having them? So we very much have two sides to the prioritization framework, or ours is the complexity and impact, very simple, but then broken out into, I think there's 23 criteria or scoring criteria that we give those complexity and impact. So it can be how, for example, like how close is it to the conversion page that is going to make that action. So if it's a checkout test, that's going to be rewarded a 5 out of 6. If it's the actual like checkout where they enter the card information, it's going to be a 6 out of 6. And then a homepage is going to be a 1 out of 6. And then we have that across the board. So from a development perspective, is it going to be done within a day, 3 days, a week, a month, however long that is going to take? And then the same on implementation. So like, is the test development going to take X amount of time versus once you actually implement it? Because there are some tests that you can run that are low complexity in the front end, but then once you actually implement it on the back end from a developer perspective, it's going to take a lot of things. And then from an impact perspective, what's the probability that's backing up this? And this is why we use tools like Lucky Orange, because what is the data that's going to determine that there's actually a big problem to be solved? So once we're looking at, say we've seen it on a heat map, we've seen this specific problem, like everyone's clicking a hyperlink, but they're missing the actual button that's next to the hyperlink. And we know that there's like something wrong there. And then we know there's like a rage click there. And then we ask customers and they're like, well, I've never seen buttons in my life, so that's why I don't click on buttons. So then we know that there's a hypothesis there that we can go, okay, we have 3 points of data, plus we've looked at GA4, and GA4 has told us that there's a massive drop-off or missed redirect or user journey on that page. So then we know that there's multiple steps that have backed up why we're fixing this, which means that it's probably going to have a higher impact in terms of the results, because there's a lot of people that have seen this. Same with traffic volumes. We can see like with the amount of traffic or high value users, we can also rank those specific pages a lot higher and where it is on the page. So there's a lot of, as I said, it was about 23 different factors that we determine it, but it's really great because it removes the bias out of everything. So, a lot of people are like, oh, we have to change this form, or we have to change this button, or this image everyone hates. And then you're like, okay, well, where did this come from? And they're like, well, we spoke to one customer about it. And then you're like, okay, well, we have other 5 data points on this specific test. We're going to run this first. Otherwise, we're wasting our time.
And even in today's world, if you're kind of a student of the game, there's so many best practices out there. So, I don't know if it pops up in the client relationship with you guys where somebody would say, hey, I read about this, or I saw this website where they're doing this thing. We want to try that. It may show up and I'll let you answer that, but we also have to evaluate whether that best practice that lives in a completely different website makes sense for this website and this audience. And even if the product is very similar, the price point's very similar, whatever it might be, it's a completely different website. So those best practices may or may not make sense.
Yeah. I mean, we have actually a really interesting case study where we ran a add to cart sticky button on mobile that would sit at the bottom of the screen. And it would have just a simple add to cart. As you scroll past the actual button on the page, then suddenly you're like reading the details, the product details, and then you have the sticky add to cart button. That worked for 6 clients with unbelievable results. It was our like killer tactic that we had in our arsenal that we were going to just throw to the world and everyone was going to make so much money. On our 7th client, we ran it and confidently and arrogantly boasted to the client how great this is, and it lost. I mean, it wasn't a
Of
massive
course.
loss, but it
Yeah.
was statistically a loss. And I think that's, we experts, we've been doing this for many years. We have the data to validate it, but it's a different industry, different customers, different products. And maybe it was just that specific client that wasn't going to crack it, and maybe the next 6 are going to crack it. But it's exactly that. It's like best practices. What are they built on? Unless they have thousands and thousands of data sets, then you can't justify that this is an actual best practice that can be implemented without testing on your website specifically.
Makes me think of the word why again. I mean, we talked about kind of at the outset that in developing the experimentation ideas, we need to find the why as part. Why do we think this is happening, so that we can decide what to do about it? But then you run the experiment and you get a result. Why comes back into the picture to say, why do we think this happened? Can you talk a little bit about how you answer that why, to say, okay, what do we do next? Whether it won or lost or didn't provide any sort of conclusive evidence, how do we say, okay, why did that happen, so that we can take the next step?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we kind of reverse engineer our research into like a mini research while we're running that test. So we're going to be looking at specific things. It's not just to run the test, as you say, and then cool, it was a statistical outcome, implement, and then we'll run this other test. Because the best tests, and this is a statistic, is that the iterations of tests perform better than initial tests that's come out cold. So that's where we come up with like the best ideas. And while we're running those experiments, we using behavioral data like heat maps and user recordings and all of that to identify why the specific thing worked. Because it's exactly that, is like knowing why something didn't work is great, but knowing why something actually worked is the best, because then you can be like, cool, now we have a pattern and we have specific themes of strategies that we determine our experiments on. So there might be, for example, there's a trust as a strategy theme, and we'll be running specific experiments underneath that trust bracket. And once we run X amount of tests, we're going to start seeing these directional themes where we can have consistencies in what specific test won. So then, for this specific website, trust and security is a massive thing. So the more experiments we run there, the higher the impact we're going to see from a results perspective. But we need to determine these themes, and these consistencies allow us to run more efficient conversion tactics on the website over time. So we reverse engineer that research, but in like a mini concentrated environment. And that's also what's really nice, is that test lives in a specific place. Because normally when you're doing research, you have the entire website with all the users to do the research on. Now you have it in a kind of isolated space where we're just running the experiment on the ad cart page, for example.
We were talking the other day here about kind of the world of personalization and AI's impact on us getting to something that's more of a real personalization for people, specifically in the e-commerce world, but even within like a B2B SaaS tool, personalizing the experience. And I'm curious where personalization shows up for you guys, because it seems like a nice thought, really hard to execute at scale and in a meaningful way. But how are you seeing the potential for personalization evolve and show up in conversion optimization?
Yeah, massively so. We're big advocates of personalization. Again, coming from our history of, we understand source-based traffic. So like we know where users are coming from and what their expectations are for when they arrive. So that's a great insight that we have as our advantage as an agency, is like we get it. We know these audiences. How we deliver those experiences are extremely important. And how it kind of works is, to your point about why, is like, why are you running why are you running personalization in the first place? It's not just something that you do for the sake of doing it. There must be a reason why you're personalizing the environment to actually, is it going to benefit results? Is there a specific problem that you're solving by creating this personalized experience? And a simple thing is to look at like B2B SaaS and you go like, okay, well, there's enterprise, medium, and startups or small businesses. Those are three different requirements. And you can run a personalization test to basically show enterprise pricing for these guys, or no enterprise pricing, where it just says book a demo and find out the pricing and get a custom plan. And then the startup guys start with a $9 a month plan, and we only show them relevant products to them. So like that's a personalization experiment, but it needs to derive from a specific problem. Like, are these guys not understanding our pricing model, or are they not understanding our product range? Is there a specific problem that they're not getting? And that derived maybe from the sales team to go like, guys, an enterprise or 50 enterprise clients came through the sales journey and everyone's asking for our $9 a month like plan, but we don't facilitate that for 1,000 employees, whatever that case is. And then the problem unpacks. So the way that we look at personalization is, again, a conversion tactic. Is like, it's either a conversion tactic in the form of an experiment or one where we personalize. So it's all that in that prioritization framework, those experiments and personalized experiences that we're creating are, again, derived from the research. So it's going to tell us that we need to run a personalized experiment. We don't start at, we need to run personalization. What do we do?
Yeah. It's the same way with like a content strategy. You think about what is the goal of creating this piece of content, and then you decide what channels, what sort of medium. Is it a video? Is it a blog post? Is it an ebook? Whatever. So it's the same sort of idea there. There's a lot of opportunity in personalization. It seems, with technology advancing, and a lot of exciting things happening there. I'm curious if there's anything else that's on your radar that heading into 2025 might have you specifically excited.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with first party data. So like the specific audiences that are now available weren't as structured and detailed as they were in the past. So like now you have these databases where they drill down into not just demographical data or user data, but also the behavioral data. And I think we're going to have a lot more data warehouses where that's all going to be integrated. Same with Lucky Orange, is like you can segment by friction points or like friction audiences, integrate that back into your personalization strategy and try to create a simplified experience as a follow-on. So I think there's going to be a lot more of, because again, personalization is based on that audience. So now we're entering into a stage where those audiences are going to be so granular and so segmented that we can literally do anything. So I think I'm excited to level up there and explore that, because I think it's going to be big next year. And then almost the follow-on to that is like, with AI and machine learning models, we're going to have a lot more of leverage on those audiences as well, that we can do a lot more dynamic experiences. Because even today, it's like on an e-commerce store, how good is a product relevancy carousel on like a product detail page? It's pretty shit. Like it's generic for everyone. It's like, I looked at a pair of shoes, here's some socks. It's like, well, what were the other websites I was looking at that was linked to this? And there are softwares that exist now, but not to the mass audience that's the average Shopify user.
Yep. Yeah. I think in many ways, the AI ability can be to make that shopping experience more like you're shopping in person, more human almost, to say, this product makes sense with this product for you. And we know that because of a billion factors and all these other visitors that have experienced this same thing. It presents some interesting opportunities. It'll present some challenges. We'll see some challenges that have always existed evolve and just take a new shape. But yeah, I agree. That's super exciting as we head into 2025. Yeah. And I imagine as an agency, evolving your offering, evolving how you're communicating everything to people, should be a really great thing.
And the biggest part of our learning model is the contextual language that it has. And that's going to be integrated into these website experiences where someone's not going to arrive on the site and just be like, this is all the products for everyone. It's going to have that contextual data that's going to be like, hey, Sean, you're back. Here's the specific products you bought. we're bringing in these products next week, so on these fit in your price range. Are you happy to add it to your cart, or whatever that experience might be?
Yeah, we shall see, and we will help shape the future, with everything that we're working on. So, Cameron, thank you so much for sharing your time and your ideas with our audience. Where can people connect with you, find you, learn about Hype Digital, and all that good stuff?
So you guys can connect with us all on LinkedIn. We're pretty active, the entire Hype team.
Nice.
Everyone's very engaging on social. Otherwise, hypedigital.co is our website, and you guys can drop any messages or any thoughts that you guys have following this. And we're pretty good on responding. So any ideas, you can shoot them over.
Well, thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks, Sean. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Lucky Orange Show. Before we go, if you haven't tried Lucky Orange yet, head over to www.luckyorange.com for a free 7-day trial of our leading conversion rate optimization toolkit. What's in that toolkit? Well, let's start with session recordings and heat maps. With session recordings, you can watch a full playback of an entire visitor journey on your website. Everywhere they click, scroll, move, everything they do in your site, a full playback, so you can see what's getting in the way of conversions and what is getting people over that finish line to convert. With dynamic heat maps, you can see the average visitor behavior on a page. So you can see clicks, moves, and scrolls. You can see how far down the page the average visitor is scrolling. And if something is below that line, that means that more than 50% of visitors are not seeing that. Lucky Orange also offers tools like live chat, announcements, and surveys so that you can communicate with your website visitors in real time. So again, if you have not tried Lucky Orange, or if you're not a user yet, head over to luckyorange.com, check it out, 7-day free trial with no credit card required. If you're a Shopify store owner, head over to the Shopify App Store to download the Lucky Orange app to your store today, as well as BigCommerce, HubSpot, Square, and many more. Check us out, and happy optimizing.